welcome to Sidekicks, the weekly cybersecurity podcast hosted by Richmond Advisory Group's principal analysts, namely me, Rory Duncan.
And me, Christina Richmond. This podcast is your go-to partner for understanding the cybersecurity market, industry trends, and the real-world challenges of protecting organizations today. Hello, Rory. How are you?
Hello, Christina. I'm good, thank you. How about you?
Yeah, I'm good. Yeah, it's early morning, so still getting the frogs out of my throat, you know. Those little reptilians are in my throat this morning. But yeah, I'm good and happy to be here.
Great. Have you got coffee with you? Have you had a coffee? Is this your second one?
Yes, it's my second one, and I'm down to the last two sips. So my mug says, "Happiness is coffee and sunrise on the lake."
Ah, lovely. And
Yeah.
has the sun risen yet, or is it still too early?
No, it has. It's actually a beautiful day in the neighborhood. Yes.
Lovely.
And how about there? Is it a lovely day, or is it another hot day for you?
It's actually kind of a temperate day. This is a discussion about weather that we always have, but that's important because about to kick off, well, in the next couple of hours, AC/DC is going to be playing just around the corner. Yes.
Oh, gosh.
I mentioned that in our pre-discussion. It's going to be noisy. Let's just put it that way. Needless to say, we have a packed show this week, haven't we, Christina?
Yes, we do. We do. Palo Alto Network posted positive Q4 earnings. So we're going to chat about that. Great for them, but what does it mean for the wider industry?
Indeed. We'll also take a look at the surge in ransomware hitting companies.
Oh dear.
Hitting companies in Europe in particular. The question is, will the US be next? Hopefully not, but...
Yeah, well, probably, but yes, hopefully not. Also, we'll take a look at some research I was doing for an inquiry, a client inquiry, about AI and agentic AI buyer behavior and some of the surprising changes. Who's in the room now as a buyer, and how the pricing is changing. So stay tuned for that.
Also, we have on this week's show coming up is our guest Simon Hodgkinson, who's a strategic advisor to security firm Semperis, but he also has various other jobs and has quite an illustrious career stretching back about 40 years in the industry. So that'd be great to chat with him when he comes on.
Wonderful. Well, good. So we have a packed show. Let's get to it. Let's just remind folks, shall we, that, if you sign up for Signal Not Noise, which is our free monthly newsletter, you'll get a 4-page extract from our recent AI security survey update. We will be updating that in the fall. And, when we launched that in the spring, agents were just a twinkle in someone's eye. And now we will be adding in agentic AI to the survey, and we'll be doing that in Europe. So we did this one in the US, and we talked to all of the buyers, CISOs, C-suite, senior IT practitioners, the CAIOs, the chief data officers, lots of different roles. And we asked them how prepared they are for attacks and what would help them prepare, as well as a myriad of other questions. So if you sign up, you'll get a 4-page extract from our current AI security survey update.
Great, thank you, Christina. And it is funny to think about how innocent and carefree we were in the in the days before agentic AI was heard of. Such are the times we were, skipping through the meadows. Completely at ease with everything in the world. Yes.
Right, not that cyber is serious by itself. No.
Indeed. Yeah, so the first story I wanted to talk about, Christina, wasn't like a specific story. Well, it's kind of interrelated. And it's really to kind of look at some of the security vendor earnings announcements in the context of Palo Alto Networks. Now, the good thing is that Palo Alto Networks had just announced Q4 revenues that are very positive. They increased revenue 16% year over year to about $2.5 billion, which is pretty good.
Oh my.
Beating market estimates, a higher earning per share, etc. And stock was up about 5%. So woohoo, good old Palo Alto Networks for doing that.
Congratulations to them.
Yes,
absolutely.
Indeed. And I know we tend to talk less about revenue and stock values, partly because it's such a volatile area, and we don't primarily talk about the financing side of things. And also a lot of the ups and downs of stocks and so on are not really indicative of long-term trends, right? But they are linked, aren't they, in a way?
They are, yeah.
And a lot of it is that they're linked to our discussion about M&A activity, which we do talk a lot about, clearly.
Well, there's a lot of M&A that occurs in this space. And so it is one of the biggest downloads we have, right, in our blogs, and one of the most popular topics on this podcast. And that's evident in the number of listens to the podcast and the number of downloads we have in our blogs when we're talking about M&A. And there's a lot occurring, and people are looking for some of our opinion on that.
Partly the reason this kind of prompted me to bring that aspect up was that earlier this month, I can't remember, it was maybe episode 28 or 29, we talked about SentinelOne's announcement that they were going to be acquiring Prompt Security. And the comment at the time I made was that stock went down by around 7%. As we saw, some other vendors' stock price went down. In other words, it was a kind of a reflection of perhaps some market pressures at the time. If a number of other vendors have poor results, then it affects everybody in a particular industry.
And then you wrote a blog on it as well, on SentinelOne buying Prompt. And didn't you say that their stock actually went down a little bit more than that, I think?
Yeah.
And there's kind of this negative halo effect, if you will, that, as you say, affects the broader set of companies in the industry. I've come to disbelieve the emotional side of stock prices. And so that volatility, I think, is challenging, because a company will report terrific earnings per share. Shareholders are thrilled, and then their stock goes down.
Yeah.
Or they make an acquisition, in this case, and it's positive, it's going in the right direction, but maybe shareholders are unhappy because the money is spent towards R&D for that inorganic growth in their R&D or in their talent. It's like, hey, you're taking away the bottom line profits that I was hoping for. So that emotional side of it is very challenging for me. And I'm glad we don't talk a lot about the financial side of things, but we do look at what the acquisitions mean, don't we?
Yeah, we do. And I think there's a much better understanding of the value of cybersecurity firms and what they're doing in a much more realistic way than perhaps those firms involved with AI, where the amount of money that is being thrown at these companies, it doesn't really equate with any kind of returns that these companies are seeing now or for perhaps many, many years in the future. But needless to say, for Palo Alto Networks, it's a good story. Their positive guidance for the rest of the year has been welcomed by the market. Some are saying, well, it also shows confidence in their own decision to buy CyberArk. That's an acquisition that went well for them. And also, I think it reflects confidence in the current executive team and board, because something I almost completely missed was the fact that Palo Alto's founder and CTO, Nir Zuk, actually announced his retirement just a few days earlier. And that didn't really seem to make a huge amount of difference. It was received as a positive thing, the next generation's taking over.
No, I think Palo's managed this very well. I think, Nir stepping down and going into retirement, I'm seeing all the congratulations to him. And yeah, indeed, congratulations on a good career and great success. And I think, to your point, you're right. The younger generation, if you can call Nikesh and team the younger generation, I don't know, but they're taking over and they're carrying the mission forward. And CyberArk, I think, is a really important acquisition for Palo. I'm not sure it was the company they may have wanted initially. I think we said earlier on a show that why not Okta?
Yeah.
I think Okta is stronger and broader in its offerings than CyberArk. But hey, maybe that wasn't available, and going for CyberArk means that they're stepping into the identity space, which was missing for them.
Yeah.
And now they will be able to integrate that into their different offerings and platforms. So I think it's good news for them, and I'm glad that shareholders are positive about it. So that's good.
Yeah. Yeah, so apparently there's been a surge in the amount of ransomware facing many of Europe's companies, and there's a concern that this is a warning shot for US defenders. And this is from an article written by Grayson Milburn, who's the Security Intelligence Director at OpenText Cybersecurity, our friends over at OpenText.
Indeed.
And it was as he wrote it for dark reading, in fact. Now,
Yeah.
I know that you and we talked about the OpenText 2025 Cybersecurity Threat Report.
We did.
And I can't remember which episode it was, many episodes ago.
It was back, yeah.
Was it
It
way
was
back?
back. And folks, if you haven't looked at it, it's a good report. We highly recommend that you do take a look at it. Yeah.
So basically, one of the key findings relating to ransomware from the report is that Europe's ransomware infection rate, they say, is now 3 to 4 times higher than that of the United States. Yeah, that is obviously concerning. Grayson says that on its face, that statistic may seem like Europe's problem alone, but it's not. He goes ahead to point out that Europe's cybersecurity posture has long been viewed as a model for other regions: tighter regulations, centralized oversight, stronger alignment between public and private sectors. So his question is, if attackers are slicing through that armor, it raises the question, what happens when they turn their full attention to the US?
And what's implied there is that we don't have the same tight regulations, the centralized oversight. And that is indeed the case. And we have had quite a spate of ransomware through the years. And so how have we been handling that to date would be an interesting question to ask. And perhaps we'll carry that forward into future episodes. But if the infection rate is 3 to 4 times higher in Europe and we are more vulnerable in this country, and I would say currently even more vulnerable, because of any time you have a change of administration, and there seems to be not the same push towards regulatory control, especially with AI coming on so strong. Here in the US, we're not seeing as much regulatory control. In fact, there's only been an executive order about let's embrace AI. And we're seeing EU taking on the AI Act. And so, again, Europe is sort of ahead of the game with regulatory control around AI. So that's all very concerning. And I do think it's a warning shot to us. And I like that he says that on its face, it seems like a Europe problem, but it's certainly not. So let's wake up, right, and take this seriously.
Yeah. So I think some of it is the fact that having regulation in place, strong regulation, does in a way clip the wings of many of these nation-state actors and organized cyber criminals who would typically, exploit the fact that there isn't regulation in place. When there is, they want to try to kind of get around that, or at least destroy it, or at least in many ways take down some of the critical infrastructure, particularly government infrastructure, that put that in place. So it's a kind of a warning as to what may come at some point.
So the last little bit of insight that we wanted to chat about is some research that I was doing, and I know you've been doing a lot of research around AI and agentic AI, Rory. I did this as a research for an inquiry for one of our subscription clients. And, the question was, what are the buying pattern shifts? In what way are clients buying cybersecurity services specifically differently today? Who are the key decision makers, and what other trends are changing buyer behavior? So let's first, talk about the people involved. Our AI security survey looked at a lot of roles that we might not have seen a year ago, like the chief AI officer or the chief data officer. We have looked at in the past, but now it is much more central in the AI conversation. But surprisingly, outside of, the usual folks, the C-suite and the CISO and folks like that, we also have the general counsel and chief privacy officer getting involved because they have to review AI safety language. There's auditing, there's cross-border data flows, sovereignty, data sovereignty that we've talked about before, lots of different regulatory control. We're also seeing risk officers involved. And because of shadow AI in this particular case, we're also seeing line of business involved. So it's a much more crowded buying space than it was. Also, what's really interesting is, We have to make sure we're looking at all the regulatory control. SEC a couple of years ago, talking about disclosing material incidents and pushing for stronger cyber governance also affects, the AI purchasing. And then this EU NIS2, the early warning that they're asking for on incident notifications, the EU AI Act obligations. So there's lots of regulatory things that buyers have to pay attention to. And then we're seeing change in pricing. And what's fascinating to me is that we're going towards more kind of telco pricing, usage or consumption based pricing, because everyone needs to cover the cost of the AI capacity. It's expensive. And so as we add in things to our SOC, like we've talked about Atom that IBM launched, ATOM, which is essentially automation in the SOC to help responders triage and do investigation. As you bring in more of those agents and or Gen AI, there is an AI capacity cost. So companies are starting to look at consumption pricing, which I think is really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
RFPs, request for proposal checklists, are also adding in AI safety controls. And this goes back to the trust and reliability concerns we saw in our survey. Folks are now saying, well, I don't really trust this. So can you tell me what your supply chain is around AI? Can you be more transparent about your model and what data has been ingested? And are you doing some testing like LLM red teaming or prompt injection testing?
Yeah.
And then data sovereignty. So those things are getting put into the RFP checklist. And the last thing I'll say, and then we can wrap up on this, is that there is a move, and I was reading some ENISA stuff out of Europe about the shift from just tools and platforms to outcomes. Now, it's rare, the outcome-based pricing, where you're trying to price based on something that you're promising the client, is rare. So we're seeing kind of this retainer plus AI capacity, the usage, plus some kind of outcome. And it's moving from the time and materials pricing of your in services to some blend, some hybrid blend of those three things. Isn't that fascinating? It's really quite a shift.
That's really interesting, Christina. It sounds like you've had quite a discussion this week. So, wow. So this week's special guest is Simon Hodgkinson, who is a strategic advisor to security firm Semperis. So welcome, Simon. Thanks for being on the show. Now, I think the last time we met was at the AI and cybersecurity event at the Excel in London in June, right? I think that's where you and I last met.
Absolutely. Yeah. Enjoyed the chat then, and I'm sure it's going to be a great chat today as well.
And we couldn't figure out when and where we last met, but it's been a minute, and we've at least chatted, over the years, and so great to reconnect, Simon.
Yeah. And I'm quite happy to share that certainly in June, Simon, when you and I met, it was one of the highlights of those number of days that I was there, I must say. But it was a really interesting discussion, primarily because we talked about the importance of business resiliency and preparedness, kind of fundamental stuff that we talked about, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I think finally, Rory, the industry's getting to the point where they recognise, you can't protect yourself from everything, but what you absolutely need to do is make sure your business is resilient.
Indeed, and I think a lot of that was based on some of the kind of fundamental things that we all should do. And Christina and I talk about this all the time. We talk about data hygiene, about knowing where your data is stored, and so on. Being able to understand how your infrastructure is placed, where things are, in order to then, if you are going to introduce other technologies such as AI or whatever else, it's very much the same process.
I've been in tech for 40 years this year.
Oh, gracious. You shouldn't admit that so readily, Simon, because you're only 29 again, so come on.
It's interesting, isn't it? I don't feel as old as I am, actually, but yeah, I've been through a lot of technology cycles, and every technology cycle we go through, we always get never put the fundamentals in place. That sort of hygiene that you need to safely adopt new technologies. I think it's almost like an industry issue where, something new comes out and everybody runs after it for good intent. So AI, obviously, great opportunities for commercial upside or operational efficiency, or making sure that your customers have a better engagement with your business, etc. But actually, at the heart of it, you've got to get those sort of foundational controls in place. That, if you like, that hygiene. Some people use the term "get the basics right," but nothing in technology is basic, in my opinion. But it
No.
does require people put the effort in to getting those sort of foundational things in place that you can safely adopt new technology.
We were chatting last week with Mark Hughes, who's over at IBM now. I'm sure you know Mark. And
I know Mark very
one
well.
of the, I'm sure, yeah. And so one of the things we sort of had this state of the state looking at where we've come from and where we're headed. But one of the things was this human nature to go after the shiny object, as you just said, for good intent, to go off and start building new tools to help your customers. But we always throw security after the fact. And so I think that's where resilience comes in, partly also, is this understanding of your risk posture and what risks you're willing to accept and which ones you need to remediate. And if you're willing to accept the risk, then how are you going to, bolster your business in terms of maybe cyber insurance or having retainers for incident response or what have you. So, I think it's human nature to always be running towards growth and to be running towards the new thing. But you're right, the fundamentals are often left behind. And I think the risk management is often, oh, this administrative or bureaucratic nightmare that folks don't necessarily want to do. But you say resilience is getting better. So tell us more about that. I love the optimism.
Well, you have to have some degree of optimism, right? Well, so
Yeah,
I
you
actually
do.
think the cyber industry is changing for the better.
Indeed.
And I think that's because you are now having business leaders run as CISOs or CIOs,
Hmm.
people that really understand that actually cyber isn't special. It's just another risk. It's just a trigger for some kind of business crisis, business impacting event.
Okay,
And
you've crushed me. No, I'm sorry. Cyber isn't special. I
no,
mean,
we're
okay,
not.
we'll just end of story right now, period. We're no longer the special kids. But I get your point. We're maturing, and that is a good thing.
And I think it's that narrative now that the executive teams and the boards and all are insisting on, that gives them a
Hmm.
balanced view of the risk, which is actually about what is the business outcome I'm trying to achieve and what risks are there to not being able to deliver that outcome, whatever it is. It's like getting oil and gas out the ground or delivering products, retail, etc. But actually, it has to be done in a way where often use the example. It's like if you're working in, say, oil and gas, if you've got some legacy tech in the operational technology environment, but you've also got a corroded pipeline, but you've only got $1 to spend. I know where I'd spend my dollar, and it would
That's
be on the
right.
corroded pipeline.
You
And I
have
think
to.
exactly, and I think that's where I'm seeing the industry maturing now, that we're not running around saying the sky's falling in, and therefore you just need to throw money at the problem. That people are having a balanced discussion about, yeah, I need to put protective controls in place, but actually, given the threat landscape, etc., one has to assume breach now. One has to assume something bad is going to happen.
Hmm.
So I need to rebalance my portfolio to this notion of resilience. And resilience is not a technology issue. It's about people,
Right.
process, and technology. It's about understand. Rory said at the start, you were talking, Rory, about understanding the inventory. Well,
Hmm.
the inventory all starts with the business process. It starts with the business outcome, the business process, and then all of the technology underpins it for you to truly understand whether your business has resilience where it actually requires it. Some aspects of the business don't. Other bits, it's absolutely critical. And I'm starting to see us as an industry spend a lot more time in a sort of balanced risk management way. How do we make sure the business is resilient, not just the technology?
Yeah, you. One of the things that you said to me, Simon, when we chatted, I made some notes this idea on businesses managing risk, but prioritizing resources based on business outcomes, not just the technology. That kind of encapsulates pretty much what you were saying there.
Yeah, and I think that's pretty critical, Rory, because there's multiple ways that you can build in resilience, and I've done a lot of crisis simulation exercises with a variety of different firms. Since I've left BP, I've done a lot of different sort of advisory and engagement pieces of work, and actually the thing that in some respects is quite fascinating is it's only when you go through those tabletop exercises, those simulation events, do the business start to really understand that actually some of the foundations they thought were in place. So, for instance, the traditional business continuity plans that they think will help them during any form of crisis that impacts that part of the business actually are typically not robust against, say, a ransomware attack, because they tend to be built on something like the old disaster recovery plans where it was 24 hours or 48 hours outage,
I have to
not
run down and get the tape, the data storage tapes, and I need to bring
yeah,
them back. You don't have that time now. You
no.
don't. No.
And
And you
and
can't actually in ransomware. And that's the other thing is I think we've now brought in more tools into cyber that's not just the castle and moat perimeter and firewall and those types of devices. We've brought in identity. We've brought in data security where you have to work in tandem with them. So having your business continuity include some of those legacy things that I was just joking about with, the data
yeah,
tapes, you have to have a much broader playbook around it now than you used to.
you absolutely do. And the other thing that's substantially changed is now every business is a digital business. So
Yeah.
so if you think back 10 years ago, and you lost your core digital platforms, and I think back to BP, there were certain parts of our business that could survive without the digital platform for days. But now, every single part of the business, for good reason, for customer retention, so the customer experience, through to just operational efficiency, cost management, every part of the business is now a digital business.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The product that they're producing, maybe getting oil out of the ground or delivering retail, retail experience is different, but actually it's all underpinned by digital. And now, if those digital platforms aren't there, minutes and hours really, really have a business impact. Days and weeks, which you get involved in ransomware, actually are an existential threat to
Yeah.
organizations.
Mm-hmm.
Semperis did a ransomware survey last year, and they've done another this year. And one of the really interesting observations was a question about why did you pay the ransom? And
Right.
16% of the organizations that paid the ransom said it was an existential threat. They would have gone out of
Yeah.
business had they not
Yeah.
paid.
Well, and it's fascinating when I hear that some folks would rather not pay and would rather negotiate, and that some cyber insurance carriers are saying, we won't pay. And when it's an existential crisis to your business and you might have to go out of business, of course. It's almost like when your child is kidnapped, if that happens, and you have to pay the ransom because you don't know what the possible end of life game is for the attacker. And in the case of some of the ransom, the end of life game is hacktivist, it's nation state. It can be from many different angles now. If you don't have your data off network in an isolated backup that is readily accessible and you can't rebuild quickly, game over.
Yeah, spot on. And that, yeah, like 16%, it was they would have gone out of business.
Wow.
And I think the intent is honourable, that governments are saying don't pay, and actually every time you pay, you're just fueling the
Sure.
ransomware gangs. But what clearly everybody should be doing is making sure they're resilient. So making
Yeah.
sure they have the ability to recover, because every organization will get hit at some point, even the best security, or with the best security capability. You've got humans in the loop, etc., and you're likely to get hit at some point. The other interesting thing I think now is that whole idea of resilience. We've thought about sort of the recovery piece, but actually it's got to be done in tandem with the business. It's got to be done from the
Yes.
perspective of when you've been compromised, from the moment you've compromised, you've got to assume that those actors are monitoring your communications, are in your email systems, your messenger systems, etc. And so building that capability to go offline fairly quickly for those sensitive conversations to figure out what you're going to
Yeah,
do in order to contain and recover your and therefore get your business back and be resilient is also critical. And I think that's often so even though that we're making progress, that's still a piece I think that people need to get their heads around is actually there's a lot more to do to make sure that you can safely contain and then get into the recovery process. And as you well know,
it's
if these destructive ransomware attacks means that actually all of the traditional mechanisms you have, processes and communication tools and all don't exist when you get hit like
That's
that.
right.
Yeah.
And this is where practice makes perfect, right? I
Mm-hmm.
used to,
Yeah,
I mean, I've been beating this drum for, I don't know, 15 years now, Simon, about the Boy Scouts here in the US and internationally have the phrase be prepared.
yeah,
And it really is something that you have to practice. If you don't have a plan and your playbooks and run books built, then shame on you, first of all, for not having those built. But second of all, do you look at them regularly? Do you practice the ultimate, not just a tabletop, but an actual exercise where you bring in your C suite, your security team, your legal, your PR, your privacy person, your HR, your marketing, comms, all of the different folks and actually practice. Okay, we're at moment zero. We've got something that looks big. Let's investigate it. Okay, now we have to, as you say, shut down the external communication, figure out what we're saying to the customers, how we're going to message this. Do we need to report it to the authorities or not?
yeah.
But it's really a great exercise, but it's not one people like to stop and do. And you're right, the businesses need to understand that this is an important piece.
Mm.
You just took me back 50 years then, Christina, when you mentioned the
50? Wait a
Boy
minute, you're only
Scouts.
29.
When you mentioned the Boy Scouts, I can remember the Be Prepared.
Indeed.
So,
To be
Very good.
prepared.
Um,
Sorry.
so, Simon, I wanted to. We have to talk about a topic that inevitably all our guests talk about, whether they want to or not, and that is really the role of AI in security.
And we haven't even really talked about that
No,
in 20 minutes of
no,
chatting. So
exactly.
good for us. That's a
Well,
record.
exactly. But I know, just as a kind of a refresher, you talked about the benefits of AI in terms of helping to identify the indicators of compromise and, for example, automating responses to cyber threats. And on the other hand, you said, well, there are the challenges, right, in terms of adopting AI safely and the need for foundational controls and so on. Do you want to talk a bit more about that? Because that got me thinking for quite a while.
yeah, I think I'll focus on the latter part of that, Rory, if that's okay. It'll come back down to this notion of getting those foundations, those solid foundations in place. What I see across the industry at the moment is people adopting the chat GPTs, the co-pilots, etc., without any real understanding of the data that they're
Mm.
allowing those platforms to consume. And that's been a problem forever, right? I mean, this isn't something that's caused by AI, but actually it amplifies the attack surface because you're given access to all of this data you don't understand. And you, again, you said it perfectly at the start of this session, Rory, about understanding all of your landscape, your data, your systems, etc. And I think that has to be absolutely the foundation of adoption of AI is you absolutely know sort of the data lineage that goes into it. So that you know where the data's from, you know whether it's current. Now you've got to be really clear what you want to put into those platforms. Otherwise, you're going to get incorrect results coming out. You've got to make sure that privacy, anonymization. So I think you've got to look at things like prompt injection. All of these things are absolutely critical to make sure that actually from a foundation perspective, you're not feeding the model. I think one of the most searched things in these things now is what does my CEO get paid? Just on
Mm.
the basis that potentially people are downloading, go back years ago, you would download stuff from systems like your HR systems into Excel to be able to manipulate them. All that data is on your file servers, your SharePoint sites, etc. Maybe doesn't have the right access controls, so least privilege type thing, and understanding who has access. And then suddenly the model's got access to that and people are able to search it. So again, it really comes down to that. For me, it's just getting those sort of basic access controls in place, making sure you understand the data that you've got, making sure the models are secure. You look for things like the models drifting, you look for bias. I think there was a great example a few years ago when Microsoft released something that in China worked perfectly, but when it came to the US and Europe, the model was influenced just by what it was being fed with by the consumers of it.
Huh.
So
Okay.
you've got to look for that sort of bias amplification as well.
I think I had a final question for you, Simon, and that's really just about the future. It's kind of related to the question that Christina usually asks, which is kind of what keeps you up at night. But where do you see things going in terms of the future, given your many years' experience?
So I think actually from an industry perspective, I think you'll continue to see the role of the Chief Information Security Officer be elevated in organizations and become more of a business leadership role than it is a technology role. And it could turn into sort of Chief Risk Officer type roles as well. So I think there's going to be an evolution of the security function, certainly within the bigger organizations. I think we will, from a technology perspective, I think you'll see a big rebalance from protect to actually things like recover, so that you make sure that actually from a technology perspective, your underpinning systems are resilient, because every business now is a digital business. There's very few that aren't. You've got your local plumbers and what have you, that's different, but every other business is a digital business. And therefore, you have to make sure that actually your systems, your processes, your people are resilient against what will be an inevitable breach at some point that every organization will experience. I think what keeps me awake at night is continually the evolution of the threat actors. So we've been talking for years about getting our arms around ransomware, and every year, it might diminish a little bit in terms of the amount of people that attack doesn't diminish, the amount of people that are breached slightly comes down, but still in certainly the surveys we run, still over 50% of organizations that have been attacked are successfully attacked. And ransomware is deployed. That, to my mind, is kind of really shocking, but I don't see that changing. The other side of that as well is you're seeing those bad actors now evolve their techniques as well. Christina said about your child being kidnapped. Now what we're starting to see, in order to turn the pressure up on organizations, is people are being threatened physically now. Staff are being threatened physically. Yeah.
And personally. So we're starting to see the intersection there, aren't we, of, the personal security, the physical security obviously has been creeping in over the years as it blends with digital, but the personal executive security is something that we've got our eye on as well, Simon. Yeah. You have a lot keeping you up at night. It's very frightening.
It is. And I'm glad I'm not a CISO actually anymore, because it's a really, really tough gig they've got. And, and the thought of execs or CISOs or what have you being threatened physically, that wasn't something I considered 4 years ago. Obviously, in the business I worked in, we had a lot of physical threats in the field, but it wasn't something that you experience kind of from a virtual or cyber perspective. And that's been a really worrying trend, actually.
Okay, the hair on my arm is standing up, and you're right. I wouldn't want to be a CISO at this juncture either. And I'm so glad you could come on and chat with us about resilience, about the state of, how everything changes, but it's still the same in terms of the fundamentals and the basic hygiene, or doing what we've always had to do, and knowing where assets, data are, and what the importance is, and who has access. And so would you come on again in the future, please? This was really delightful.
Oh, I'd be absolutely delighted. I love talking to both of you. I think it's a great podcast as well. So more than happy to at any point.
We really appreciate you coming on and spending a half an hour with us today. This was great.
Great. Yeah, thank you, Simon.
It was my pleasure, honestly. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye. Yes, that was a great discussion with Simon, Christina,
That was
wasn't
so
it?
much fun.
Mm.
So much fun and so interesting. And I think when you have the perspective and wisdom of the experience that he brings in this industry, you start to look at things much more as a business challenge than just a technology challenge. And so brilliant conversation. Just really enjoyed him immensely.
Yeah. We look forward to having him back on again in the near future.
Indeed. So meanwhile, folks, leave us a message. What did you think? Are we hitting our stride with interesting guests? Do you want more of something or less of something? Leave us feedback and suggestions. You can write us at Christina@richmondadvisorygroup.com. That's me.
Or you can send me a message at rory@richmondadvisorygroup.com. But you can also leave us a voicemail if you would rather get something off your chest and talk to us. And we'll read out the most interesting, least spicy of those. And you can do so through SpeakPipe. So that's www.speakpipe.com/cyber_sidekicks.
Please do. I mean, we do this for you. So let us know where we're, spot on and where we're not. And we would love to hear from you. And thanks so much for joining us. This was a fun episode to record, and we just appreciate you listening along. So join us again next week. We will have Paul Farrington, who is the Chief Product Officer of Glasswall, and he will probably be chatting with us about Zero Trust and content disarm and reconstruction. Interesting to hear about that.
Yes, indeed. And perhaps we'll even change the name of the podcast, Christina. Given some of your comments, the Perspective and Wisdom podcast. I think that was your...
Or the Boy Scouts podcast.
Something like that. No. Yes, just to reflect the collective grey hair we've got. No, don't worry, folks. I was only being facetious. Cyber Sidekicks is the name, and that shall stay. Thanks again, folks. We look forward to talking with you again next week. Join us. See you then. Bye-bye.
See you then. Thanks. Bye-bye.